And finally, new rule, let's put a trigger warning on trigger warnings. A new study from Flinders University analyzed a dozen other studies on trigger warnings, and they all came to the same conclusion. They don't work. Not only don't they protect your feelings, but if you actually have been traumatized by something they're warning you about, a trigger warning makes it worse. It's like if seatbelts were made out of broken glass. It winds up just being a reenactment of the old joke, how do you keep a pussy in suspense? I'll tell you later. Now, for those of you who have been living on an offshore oil rig for the last 10 years and don't know what I'm talking about, a trigger warning is a kind of close your eyes, here comes an ouchie. That, like so many bad ideas in recent years, got started on college campuses. Students started demanding them so they could get ready in case something in a book or a piece of art or a history lesson reminded them that life included bad things and not just good, and sometimes people were mean. You can't have that just sprung on you. Several universities in recent years have even compiled lists of words we should be warned about to get rid of altogether, including balls to the wall, no can do, you guys, master, white paper, man in the middle, gyp, off the reservation, peanut gallery, insane, and virgin. Virgin? We can't say virgin as opposed to what? Person experiencing not getting laid? You would think that one would take the cake for the oversensitivity, but the students at Brandeis said, hold my baby bottle. They made a list of expressions they don't want to hear because they remind them of violence. Terms like killing it, beating a dead horse, and yes, even trigger warning. I guess they don't teach irony in college anymore. Anyway, at some point, the trigger warning escaped from campus and got out into the real world, and now they're everywhere. Warnings at the top of Reddit threads and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram posts. Warnings before your favorite serial killer series, before news articles. Disney put an advisory on the movie Dumbo, warning viewers about stereotypes because otherwise you might think it was a documentary about flying elephants. Turner Classic Movies still wants to show you classic movies, but before we do, first there are a few parts we'd like you to feel really bad about. Now enjoy the show. Theaters do it now, too. The storied Guthrie Theater in Minneapolis tipped off their crowd that a play included simulated gunshots, strobe lights, and haze. Haze. In case you've been groped by a thick fog.
Good morning. It is Thursday, March the 9th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the Star-Spangled Banner, we will have no free lunch, 30 covert manipulation tactics, rape of the mind, Donald Trump, Northern Virginia legal advice, all that and more when I come back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing and remove your hats for the national anthem of the United States of America.
Can you see
Thank you. And now, No Free Lunch, 250 Economic Truths by David-Bahnsen.
The most obvious and yet the oldest and most stubborn error on which the appeal of inflation rests is that of confusing money with wealth. Real wealth, of course, consists in what is produced and consumed, the food we eat, the clothes we wear, the houses we live in. It is railways and roads and motor cars, ships and planes and factories, schools and churches and theaters, pianos, paintings and books. Yet so powerful is the verbal ambiguity that confuses money with wealth that even those who at times recognize the confusion will slide back into it in the course of their reasoning. Henry Hazlitt. Money is a medium of exchange. It can be stable or not. When it is not, it is nearly always the fault of a policy or policymaker. Wealth is the byproduct of what we produce. We can't artificially create wealth, only money. The inability to understand this is the cause of unspeakable economic error.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, 30 Covert Emotional Manipulation Tactics by Adeline Birch, Chapter 1, which lasts about 5 minutes.
1. What is covert emotional manipulation? Until you realize how easily it is for your mind to be manipulated, you remain the puppet of someone else's game. Evita Okel. Covert emotional manipulation tactics are underhanded methods of control. These deceptive tactics act to change your behavior and perceptions. Covert manipulation operates under the level of your conscious awareness. Victims usually do not realize they are being manipulated while it is happening. That is exactly why it is important to become aware of the methods manipulators use. Who are these manipulative people? The most skillful and dangerous manipulators are those included in psychology's dark triad. Psychopathic, narcissistic, and Machiavellian personalities lack empathy and manipulate in a planned and purposeful way for their own personal gain, no matter the cost to someone else. They are callous, insensitive, aggressive, and opportunistic individuals who use others and act out against them to achieve their own ends. It is entirely possible to have a member of the dark triad as your partner, friend, neighbor, relative, co-worker, or boss. They attempt to hide who they really are by creating a seemingly normal and often a charming and likable persona. But their malicious intent remains active behind the mask. These individuals are detrimental to the mental health of anyone who has close contact with them. People without serious psychological disorders also use manipulation to get what they want, often without malicious intent and sometimes without any awareness of what they are doing. It is said that we are all guilty of using manipulation on occasion, instead of communicating our needs and desires in a direct way. There is a significant difference between someone who is a pathological manipulator and someone who uses manipulation to get what they want from time to time. Pathological manipulators have no other way to relate to others, and nothing real to offer in a relationship, such as love and intimacy. There is no way to change them. Manipulation undermines your ability to consciously make decisions and take actions in your own best interest, in accordance with your personal values and boundaries. In other words, manipulation gets you to do things you wouldn't otherwise do. At its worst, emotional manipulation methodically wears down your self-worth and self-confidence and damages your trust in your own perceptions. It can make you unwittingly compromise yourself to the point of losing your self-respect and developing a warped concept of reality. With your defenses weakened or completely disarmed in this manner, you are left even more vulnerable to further manipulation. A skilled emotional manipulator gets you to put your sense of self-worth and emotional well-being into his or her hands. Once you're tricked into making that grave mistake, they methodically chip away at your identity and wreak havoc on your psychological health, and serious harm results. In order to be successful, a malicious manipulator must know your vulnerabilities, conceal their aggressive intentions and behavior, and be ruthless enough not to care what harm their manipulation causes you. Taking control and getting what they want are all that matters. Becoming aware of the tactics manipulators use enables you to identify concealed aggression. But it is not always easy to do, because manipulators count on your trust, doubt, and strong emotions, guilt, fear, love, and shame, to prevent you from thinking clearly and seeing the manipulation. In many cases, they manufacture these emotions purposely for that reason. That's how manipulators get away with what they do. Therefore, it is very important for you to recognize when you are doubting your own perceptions or intuition, or experiencing an emotion that makes you vulnerable to manipulation. Although this book focuses on romantic relationships, the manipulation tactics described are simply that, manipulation tactics. They are the very same methods employed by manipulative friends, family members, co-workers, bosses, neighbors, and even children.
And that was 30 Covert Emotional Manipulation Tactics, Chapter 1. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, 5 minutes of Donald Trump detailing his war against the drug cartels.
Heroin, meth, and other lethal drugs are pouring across our wide-open border, stealing hundreds of thousands of beautiful American lives, and it's happening like never before in our history. Children are being left without parents, families are being ripped apart, communities are being decimated. Our neighbors and fellow citizens are having their entire worlds destroyed like nobody thought possible. Our country is being poisoned from within by the drugs and by all of the other crime that's taking place. The drug cartels are waging war in America, and it's now time for America to wage war on the cartels. In this war, Joe Biden has sided against the United States and with the cartels. They are making more money than they've ever made before, times 10. There's never been anything like it. They're major companies. They're bigger than even some of our biggest companies. Biden's open border policies are a deadly betrayal of our nation. When I am president, it will be the policy of the United States to take down the cartels, just as we took down ISIS and the ISIS caliphate, and just as, unlike the situation we're in today, we had a very strong border, the strongest border, in fact, in the history of our country, and drugs were at a low of 45 years. There's been nothing like what we did just 2 years ago. We will show no mercy on the cartels. Every day, drug traffickers are using the waters of our region to ship their lethal poisons to America, killing so many of our people and ruining families. In addition to restoring strong border security, I will deploy all necessary military assets, including the U.S. Navy, to impose the full naval embargo on the cartels. I did that before, and it worked. What we did was incredible. We will guarantee that the waters of the Western Hemisphere are not used to traffic illicit drugs to our country. Furthermore, I will order the Department of Defense to make appropriate use of special forces, cyber warfare, and other overt and covert actions to inflict maximum damage on cartel leadership, infrastructure, and operations. I will designate the major cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. We will sever their access to global financial systems. I will also work to forge an unprecedented partnership with neighboring governments in our region, just like I did in Mexico. And remember, in Mexico alone, an estimated 100,000 civilians have been tragically murdered or gone missing at the hands of these cartels. The Mexican government, run by a very fine man, the president, is really working hard, but it's not working out. These cartels are vicious and they're violent, and they have Mexico for now stymied. Well, we have to help Mexico, and we have to stymie the cartels. Either we will get the full cooperation of other governments to stop this menace, or we will expose every bribe, every kickback, every payoff, and every bit of corruption that is allowing the cartels to preserve their brutal reign. And it is indeed brutal. Finally, as I have said before, I will ask Congress to pass legislation ensuring that drug smugglers and human traffickers receive the death penalty. The drug cartels and their allies in the Biden administration have the blood of countless millions on their hands. Millions and millions of families and people are being destroyed. When I'm back in the White House, the drug kingpins and vicious traffickers will never sleep soundly again. We did it once, and we did it better than anybody else. There's never been a better border than we had just 2 years ago. It was strong, it was powerful, and it was respected all over the world. And now we're laughed at all over the world. And we're not going to let that happen much longer. We have to take over. We have to be tough. We have to be smart. We have to be fair. But if we don't do something immediately, our country is gone.
And that was Donald Trump detailing his plans for the war against the drug cartels in Mexico. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the rape of the mind, and this is like chapter 2, I think. Let me double check. Well, it just says isolation and other factors in conditioning.
Isolation and other factors in conditioning. Pavlov made another significant discovery. The conditioned reflex could be developed most easily in a quiet laboratory with a minimum of disturbing stimuli. Every trainer of animals knows this from his own experience. Isolation and the patient repetition of stimuli are required to tame wild animals. Pavlov formulated his findings into a general rule in which the speed of learning is positively correlated with the quiet and isolation. The totalitarians have followed this rule. They know that they can condition their political victims most quickly if they are kept in isolation. In the totalitarian technique of thought control, the same isolation applied to the individual is applied also to groups of people. This is the reason the civilian populations of the totalitarian countries are not permitted to travel freely and are kept away from mental and political contamination. It is the reason, too, for the solitary confinement cell and the prison camp. Another of Pavlov's findings was that some animals learn more quickly if they were rewarded by affection, by food, by stroking, each time they showed the right response, while others learned more quickly when the penalty for not learning was a painful stimulus. In human terms, the latter animals could be described as learning in order to avoid punishment. These different reactions in animals may perhaps be related to an earlier conditioning by the parents, and they find their counterparts among human beings. In some people, the strategy of reward and flattery is a stimulus to learning, while pain evokes all their resistance and rebellion. In others, retribution and punishment for failure can be a means of training them into the desired pattern. Before he can do his job effectively, the brainwasher has to find out to which category his victim belongs. There are people more amenable to brainwashing than others. Part of the response may be innate or related to earlier conditioning to conformity. Pavlov also distinguished between the weaker type of involuntary learning, in which the learned response was lost as soon as some disturbance occurred, and the stronger type, in which the training was retained through all kinds of changed conditions. As a matter of fact, Pavlov described more types of learning than this, but for our purposes, it is only important to know that there are some types of people who lose their conditioned learning easily, while others, the so-called stronger types, retain it. This, by the way, is another example of how our choice of words reflects our bias. The descriptions strong and weak depend completely on the aim of the experimenter. For the totalitarian, the weak POWs is the man who stubbornly refuses to accept the new conditioning. His weakness may be, in fact, a resistance, the result of a previous strong conditioning to loyalty to anti-totalitarian principles. We never know how strongly conditioning and initial learning are impressed on the personality. Rigid dogmatic behavior has its roots in early conditioning, and so may submissiveness based on ignorance rather than knowledge. Pavlov showed, too, how internal and external factors interact in the conditioning process. If, for example, a new laboratory assistant was brought in to work with the animals, all of their newly acquired patterns could easily be inhibited because of the animal's emotional reactions to the newcomer. Pavlov explained this as a disruptive reaction caused by the animal's investigatory reflexes, which led them to sniff around the stranger. Current psychology tends to interpret it as a result of the changed emotional rapport between the animal and its trainers. We can easily expand the implications of this more modern view into the field of human relations. It points up the fact that there are some persons who can create such immediate rapport with others that the latter will soon give up many old habits and ways of life to conform with new demands. There are inquisitors and investigators whose personalities so deeply affect their victims that the victims speedily yield their secrets and accept entirely new ways of thinking. We can see the same thing in psychotherapy, where the development of an emotional rapport between doctor and patient is the most important factor leading to a cure. In some cases, rapport can be established immediately. In others, rapport cannot be built up at all. In most cases, it develops gradually during the course of the therapy. It is not difficult for a psychologist to test a man's softness and willingness to be conditioned, and as a matter of fact, the Pavlovians have developed simple questionnaires through which they can easily determine a given individual's instability and adaptability to suggestion and brainwashing. Pavlov found that all conditioning, no matter how strong it had been, became inhibited through boredom or through the repetition of too weak signals. The bell could no longer arouse salivation in experimental dogs if it was repeated too often or its tone was too soft. A process of unlearning took place. The result of such internal inhibition of conditioning and the loss of conditioned reflex action is sleep. The inhibition spreads over the entire activity of the brain cortex. The organism falls into a hypnotic state. This explanation of the process of inhibition was one of the first acceptable theories of sleep. An interesting psychological question is whether too much official conditioning causes boredom and inhibition, and whether that is the reason why the Stakhanovite movement in Russia was necessary to counteract the loss of productivity of people. We can make a comparison with what happened to our prisoners of war in Korea. Under the daily signal of dueling routine questions, for every word can act as a Pavlovian signal, their minds went into a state of inhibition and diminished alertness. This made it possible for them to give up temporarily their former democratic conditioning and training. When they had unlearned and suppressed the democratic way, their inquisitors could start teaching them the totalitarian philosophy. First, the old patterns have to be broken down in order to build up new conditioned reflexes. We can imagine that boredom and repetition arouse the need to give in and to yield to the provoking words of the enemy. Later, I shall come back to the system of negative stimuli used in conditioning for brainwashing.
And that was The Rape of the Mind, Isolation and Other Factors in Conditioning by Joost-Meerlo, M.D. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now our Northwest Virginia lawyer telling you how you can get your criminal record expunged.
Friend of the channel, Celia, has written in to ask whether or not she can get her 10-year-old criminal record expunged. That is, can she have it erased? Short answer is, sadly, no. Many states allow you to expunge minor criminal offenses after the passage of some years, usually 10. Virginia does not allow this. Once you have a criminal conviction on your Virginia record, it will stay forever. What Virginia does allow to be expunged are charges for which you were found not guilty, or charges which were dropped. That is, if the only thing on your record is an arrest, you can get that expunged. Now, these fall into two categories in Virginia. Category number one is you don't have a criminal record. The only thing on your record is the fact of an arrest at some time in the past. Under Virginia law, you have an absolute right to have that arrest expunged after 1 year. It is a simple application to the circuit court in the county where you live. And if you fall into this category and the state police don't find any other charges on your record, any other convictions on your record, then the judge of the circuit court will expunge this record. The second category is you do have other convictions on your record, but you weren't convicted of this one. Now you don't have an automatic right to it. Now it's up to the circuit court judge to decide whether it's reasonable to remove this particular charge from your record. Typically, the standard that's used is whether or not the existence on your record of this charge will have a material outcome or material effect on your life. And where this typically comes up is, look, I have a minor conviction for marijuana possession from years ago, but now I've been charged with a much more serious crime. I've been charged with robbery, okay? Robbery is a pretty scary thing. With a arrest for robbery on your record, you might have a hard time getting a job. You might have a hard time getting a loan or a mortgage or any number of things. So you would have a really good reason to want that charge of robbery off your record. And so the judge might well find that having a charge for a serious case like that is going to materially affect you. Whereas if it was just another arrest for marijuana possession, the judge could reasonably find that the existence of the first conviction means that a second charge of it on your record doesn't really have much of an effect on your life. All right, so finally, what does expungement actually mean? A lot of people are surprised. They think that somehow the court is going to reach out and erase it from the world. Well, they can't really do that. The judge orders the state police to expunge it from their records. And that's it. The courts and the state police no longer have a record of the expunged charge. But the world still knows. There are people that work in every courthouse in the state and presumably every courthouse in the country. And that is their daily job, to go and mine data and find out who was charged with what. They put that into their own databases and sell those databases. That's how you see these companies where you can look somebody up and find out what their criminal record is. The expungement does not reach into those civilian databases and get rid of the data. The courts don't have that right or authority. All the courts can do is to remove the data that they possess. Still valuable to do, but it is not foolproof. Companies can still find out that you had this charge. The last expungement topic I want to cover is a common question I get, and that is, if I have a charge expunged and then I go to apply for a job and they ask me, have you ever been arrested? What should I say? Well, first of all, there's very, very few jobs that are ever going to ask you about arrests. Jobs ask about convictions. Have you ever been convicted of a crime? And the answer is no. The answer was no even before the expungement. You were not convicted. However, some jobs, particularly jobs in law enforcement, intelligence, the military, they might very well ask this. They might ask, were you ever arrested? And the answer is yes, you were arrested, even if it was expunged. So typically you're going to have to go to some work and explain that the arrest was in error and you were not found guilty, and that the record of it was later expunged.
And that was Northern Virginia Legal Advice, How to Get Your Criminal Record Expunged. Back in a minute. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. So I'm reminding you that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.